I'm Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 119 of Caropop. It's time for part 2 of our conversation with XTC bassist, songwriter, and singer Colin Moulding. XTC was slumping commercially in the mid-1980s when its record company dispatched the band to Woodstock, New York to work with producer Todd Rundgren while living on the premises. The experience was an unusual one that Moulding describes here, with heightened tensions between Rundgren and XTC's lead singer-songwriter Andy Partridge. Rundgren chose the album's songs and running order, including 5 Moulding contributions. Grass by Moulding was released as the first single, and the album, Skylarking, turned out to be a career highlight. I love that album. Oranges and Lemons, the bright-sounding 1989 follow-up, featured another single from Moulding, King for a Day. The band performed it on Late Night with David Letterman for its first onstage performance in 7 years. On subsequent albums, None Such, Apple Venus Volume 1, and Wasp Star, Apple Venus Volume 2, Moulding showcased himself further as a keen observer of everyday life minutiae. It's such later songs of which he is most proud. Moulding tells how financial issues plagued the making of Apple Venus Volume 1 and Wasp Star, and precipitated Dave Gregory's departure from the band. How did Moulding feel about XTC continuing with just him and Partridge? What were the issues that finally tore those two apart and spelled the end of XTC? What role did the late River Phoenix play in getting Moulding to work on Sam Phillips's great record, Martinis and Bikinis? How did Moulding reunite years later with original XTC drummer Terry Chambers with a TC&I EP and a series of live performances in Swindon? Which song from that project does he consider to be his best ever? Why didn't he want to take TC&I on the road? How did he come to record a solo single, The Hardest Battle? Now that all 4 XTC members live in Swindon, do they ever see each other? When is the last time all 4 of them were in a room together? Will they ever share a stage or studio again? Please enjoy part 2 of this Caropop conversation with Colin Moulding. You sort of had what you called your last chance where you wrote and recorded with Todd Rundgren to make Skylarking. How much of the 25 O'Clock experience carried over into that? Because certainly Skylarking for an XTC album was sort of the most sort of 60s kind of influenced record, even though obviously it was still XTC.
Well, it had a number of different types of song on there, but it was Todd that chose the songs. Andy and I sent our demos over to Todd, and a week later he cut it together and he said, I got a running order for you guys. What? We usually do a bunch of songs and we see which turn out best. That was the way we usually work. But he cut all these songs together and he said, this is what we're going to be doing, and it was like, whoa, I'm sure red flags went off in Andy's mind, definitely.
Well, because you had 5 songs on that record. Yeah, I had 5 songs, and he told us what the running order, and essentially when we got to Woodstock or Bearsville, we started on track 1, side 1, and it's very direct way of working, but that was what we did. And when the Summer's Cauldron goes into Grass, we actually stopped playing so Grass could take over. It was a bizarre way of working, but I think he got the whole album on 2 reels, side 1, side 2. There you go, fellas. And it was very direct and very almost honest way of working, And it was the strangest 3 months of my life, I think, We went to his place at a place called Mink Hollow. A lot of people would recognize that name from one of his albums, I think. Right.
Just in the hills above Bearsville, right in the middle of the Catskills. It was real fur trapping country, really. And his assistant picked us up from the airport. We had a 3-hour drive right the way up to Bearsville. Got there in the middle of the night and checked into our room. He put us up in the guest house. Todd had a house built for himself up on the hill, and we were down lower near the river, real New England type house with veranda, the whole rocking chair thing, It was one of those type of old houses, real frontier house, And he was away at the World's Fair, I remember, in Vancouver, and we didn't see him for a week, so we just mubbed about the house for a while, and with not really much to do for a week until he appeared one day, and showed us around the place, but yeah, it was strange because we didn't actually record much when we were there initially. It wasn't until we went to San Francisco, because Todd said, well, I want you to play some bass. I said, well, no drums,
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just the three of you without a drummer, right?
Yeah. And he wanted me to play just to a click. And I thought, oh, Christ, we're not going to, where's he going to put his foot? I need to be on the foot. And he said, well, all right then. So essentially for those first few weeks, we just booked tape space and a click, really, for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then we went to San Francisco and we worked at the Tube studio, which was called the Sound Hole, I think, and near the docks in San Francisco, and in an old warehouse, I think. And that's essentially where we rehearsed, because we hadn't rehearsed up until then. I didn't know the chords to half of these songs because Andy had said, well, we don't even know what he's going to choose. So what can we rehearse, So essentially, we had to learn the songs while we were out there and then record them more or less straight away, So yeah, that was the way it started.
And the Tube's drummer, Prairie Prince, was the one in San Francisco, so that's why you were out there.
Yes, that's principally why we were working at the Tube studio, because Prairie, obviously, his involvement with the Tubes and him actually has been selected to actually drum on the record. I think Todd chose him. He said, you'll be happy with him. He's really good. And he was, no doubt about it. He was a great drummer and, picked it up real easy. Probably more so than what we did, really. But yeah, so it all happened really in San Francisco. We did the majority of the album there, and then obviously came back to Woodstock to do overdubs, and Todd was left to mix it, really. He didn't want Andy around for the mixing. No, go home.
Yeah, I was going to say on the drumming thing that I would think of anyone in the band that would be especially tricky for you, because you and the drummer are the rhythm section, and you're being asked to sort of put on bass parts before you have that drum, and then you have to actually work with the drummer. And I mean, and I was also, you were working with a lot of different drummers. Like, did it just become more challenging in those years just because of these different recording approaches and different drummers for you as the bassist to sort of lock in on that?
Well, I like to rehearse because, the more you rehearse, the more you can go outside the boundaries. Yeah, we got that in the pocket. Let's see what we can do now, So, yes, I would have liked more rehearsal, certainly with Prairie. But, circumstances, it wouldn't allow us to, get more acquainted with the songs, really. So we were rehearsing, and then we were more or less recording straight away. It's not ideal, but it turned out really good anyway. But yeah, it was tougher, really. Much prefer to kind of know what I'm doing to begin with.
You didn't sort of come in all Paul McCartney like afterwards and say, "Oh, I'm going to put a new bass line on this now."
No, Todd wouldn't allow you to. I think the most we did was 2 takes. And you'd say to him, I remember there was a keyboard part on That's Really Super Girl. That's right, on that particular track. And Todd was playing keyboards on that. And he was kind of feeling it out and all the rest of it, and then was pressing the record on the machine and then putting it down, And Andy said to him, right, that's the keyboard part. Now let's do it for real. And Todd said, it's done. And he never went back and did it again. He said, no, it's done. That's it. Forget it. It's in the pocket, And Andy was most put out about that. He was used to 7 takes, But Todd was a 1 or 2 take man. No, the second take is the one, You start going further on than that, and then you're going to get out of the pocket, And to a certain extent, I've learned that he's probably right.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna say,
anyway,
did Andy have some different idea for what he thought the keyboard part would sound like, or was it just that it was so quick? He was like, "Wait a minute, it can't be done yet."
no, I think it was because it was so quick. It had to be given its due. And he felt that it hadn't been because it was done so quickly. But in a way, it was the take, you know? I think it's a job. I think what we'd have done is another Cilla Black thing from where you do 20 odd takes and you end up using the second take, right? You know, it was one of them. That's the way he liked to work. And to a certain extent, he was right. Very often it is the second take that's in the pocket and then you go further out, you know,
Right.
but, you know, at that time, Andy liked his pound of flesh, you know?
When people are recalling those sessions, they often talk about, Andy and Todd butting heads. Was it an artistic thing, a personality thing, or both?
Artistic thing and personality, both really. Andy and my room were together at the guest house, but we could talk to each other through the wall because the walls were quite thin, our bedrooms, you know? And he would say, "I'm really not enjoying this, man. I'm really not enjoying it, you know." And principally because, you know, that Todd was calling the shots and Andy had always been used to calling the shots. And that's why in the old-fashioned sense, like a George Martin type figure, Todd was, you know. And we never really had that, you know. Andy was always kind of had a finger in the pie, really, in regard to the production, you know. And he is a knowledgeable guy, you know, but sometimes, you know, it hasn't always delivered probably the album that the record company wanted, you know. And you've got to remember that we'd done 2 albums, they hadn't been successful, and therefore they wanted someone to take over the reins, I think. And Todd was their man, really.
Well, it's interesting because Skylarking was such a, successful album and also like a wonderful record, but it's not sort of wonderful in the way that you think of albums that were coming out in late 1986 sounded like. It doesn't sound particularly of that era. It's its own thing, but there's something so well realized about it that it sort of popped out, but it also did boost you guys commercially.
Yeah, he wasn't that type of producer that he went for an album that he thought would hold together well, I think. It wasn't the kind of, oh, let's have a hit, you know? It wasn't that. He's so much more than that, I think. He went for the songs. Well, he wanted to make an album he wanted to call the album Day Passes. That was his idea.
Right.
As, you know, we all kind of scratched heads on that one because he wanted the feeling that the album would start in the morning and go through to the evening and then the dawn and the dusk, you know.
Right. Like Days of Future Past. Like it's almost the same title and same concept.
Exactly. Yeah, the passing of a day, really. Yeah. And that was what he wanted to do. And he chose the songs accordingly to that, really. Which I think it succeeded. You know, it was a concept that was realized, I think.
Well, and then you also had one of these, phenomena from back in that era that is less easy to do in the internet age, where you had the single where the actual human DJs were flipping over the record and playing Dear God, and to the extent that that record was pulled and the song was added back to the album. Was that part of the original, Todd's when Todd sort of originally mapped out that record, was Dear God part of the order? Because it sounds like it when it comes right after Dying.
Yes, it was.
Goes into Dying. I'm sorry.
Yes, it does. And it was in Todd's original running order. But it was Andy who wanted to take it off. And we all kind of scratched our heads. What do you mean, take it off? It's one of the best songs on the record. What are we taking it off for? But Andy, by that time, had persuaded the record company that he'd come up with a better song called Another Satellite. And he wanted to do it, and he got the record company involved. So Todd was compromised at that point. Huh. He had to go along with what the record company wanted. But it was not on his original running order. He included Dear God in particular. Of course, and then it got put onto the B-side of Grass, which went to radio, and in the college campuses, they began to turn it over and was playing Dear God. We really got hooked on it, and it became a campus hit, So that's the story behind that. But it was in Todd's original running order.
Right. And then they pulled off Mermaid Smiled and left on Another Satellite when they re-released it. And I was glad when they finally put out a version with both songs, because I hated losing Mermaid Smiled from that record.
Yeah, I did. I did. I thought I had real atmosphere and about being by the seaside as a kid, And so, that was one of my regrets as well. But,
And actually, you could see that Another Satellite kind of fits that concept less than the other songs. Like if Todd was sort of programming it in that Days Past way, Another Satellite is a bit of an outlier there.
Yeah, I thought it sounded a bit too futuristic. I didn't really think it fitted that well, But I think by that time that the animosity between Todd and Andy had got so bad that I think Andy felt that he was getting one up on Todd. That was my feeling about it. And to get the record company on his side.
To side with him.
Yeah, and for Todd to be overruled, I think he felt that was a feather in his cap,
And that lasted a few months. and then they pulled the record and put Dear God back on it. So yeah, it was reinstated, but yeah. But by that time, CDs were coming in, so it all became a little bit academic anyway. So yeah, a pretty unfortunate episode. But yeah, I mean, to be fair to Todd, it was on the record and was intended to be on the record, Was there any blowback from the record company when, you have this, kind of breakthrough record with Skylarking, you've got an American hit to, did they want you to get back in the studio and do an XTC record as opposed to doing another Dukes record? Or was it just like, it doesn't really matter, just do your Dukes record and then do, Oranges and Lemons?
Well, I think they were pleased that the fact that we at last had an American career, first and foremost. It was a big hit around the campuses and was played on the radio, and and it was released as a single in England because of it. And so, yeah, we were forging a career for ourselves in America. And obviously, what with Oranges and Lemons in our sights now, we were able to have a bit of money put behind us, which for a couple of albums we hadn't really. Right.
And you recorded that one in America also.
Yeah, the feeling was, well, let's go with an American producer as well, but it wasn't going to be Todd. I knew that.
Right. Paul Fox produced that, but was that more sort of Andy and the band kind of taking control of the sessions a little more?
Yeah, it was business as usual, I think, after that. I think Paul wanted to impress Andy and get the right side of him because he'd heard the bad experiences that he'd had with Todd. So he wanted to come on board as someone who was Andy's friend and not go against him too much, which I don't think is necessarily a good idea, Got to have your own way of doing things, So yeah, I think he wanted to please Andy and get on his side, really.
Yeah, and you had it's a very bright record. It's a lot of energy on that. Another drummer. Yeah. You guys have re-released so many of these records. Do you go back to them and sort of rehear them and, sort of reassess what you thought of them, with the distance of, these re-releases?
Yeah, I don't get involved with that. I got my own thoughts on that. I think it's great that the 5.1 surrounds are coming out because that's another format and people want that, But if you ask me to compare the previous stereo analog compared to the digital, the jury's out on that one, I think.
Are the new vinyl editions, are those digital versions of them?
I think they are, yes. But there was that thing with Skylarking about this cross-polarization or something.
Right.
Don't run away with the idea that I'm against the reissues. I'm not. They're a good package. But I'm talking like for like in regard to stereo versions. The 5.1 is brilliant because although I don't have a 5.1 surround system, I know a lot of people who do and really enjoy those records in that format, So that's all to the good. So
Oranges and Lemons, A King for a Day, that's another, hit that you wrote. Mayor of Simpleton got a lot of airplay also.
Yeah, yeah.
And you did your little acoustic tour, which is where we came in because that's when I saw you guys. And I have a recording also of when you guys were in Chicago doing WXRT as well. Was that a good time for you? Like, was it, do you feel like you did what you wanted to do?
We had 8 months in the Los Angeles sunshine, so it was a good time. And the families came over and, we stopped in an apartment complex and, it was great. It was great because you didn't leave your family at home and it was, they were, could go home and have dinner with my wife and my kids. That was great. So, I enjoyed the making process, certainly, yeah. And they were a great bunch to work with. Ed Thacker, twiddling the knobs, and Paul, who's sadly no longer with us. He died last year, but
right, I saw that. I was surprised.
Yeah, but they were a great team, and we had lots of laughs. We did it at a place called Suma, which was on Hollywood. I think where Coenga crosses Hollywood, I think.
And so what is your status in England at this point when Oranges and Lemons, were you getting listened to there, or was it really like more of your audience was in the US now?
I think more in the US, I think we've been largely forgotten in England. We were a band of the early 80s, I think. And occasionally you'd hear it on the radio, perhaps Mayor Simpleton. I didn't hear King for a Day, I don't think, but I'd certainly heard Mayor Simpleton for a while. I'm not sure how well it did. Maybe it made top 40, I'm not sure. But there was a feeling that the career was in America there, certainly. There was a feeling that we were has-beens, I think, in the UK, a band from the early 80s, Nigel and Senses and stuff, People remembered them, but they didn't, the newer ones, they couldn't place, I don't think. No, there was a feeling that, our career was definitely in the States at that time, I think.
So you were talking early on about how you would sort of come in and play a song on acoustic guitar and the band would all sort of figure out how it sounded, and that's where the magic happened. By the time you're doing Oranges and Lemons and then None Such is the next record, was it still that process, or because you had those 4 tracks and you could make the demos, was it a little bit less of an organic, sort of collaborative process at that point?
Yeah, it was less. It was more kind of what the writer had intended on the demo, really. I remember when we did the bass on Mayor Simpleton, Andy came to me and said, could you play the riff? This was the riff that was on his demo in the verses. And he said, if you play the riff, you can have a free hand with the rest. There was an element that you could have a free hand, but there were certain riffs that needed to be played, I think with the bass on Mayor Simpleton, I played his riff in the verses. And as delightful as the riff is, and it's wonderful, it goes well with the guitar part, but there was still a lot to do. So it was the joining up of the guitar parts with those scales and stuff. So there was a bit to do.
That is one of your busier parts.
Yeah, it was pretty fast to play, and it was a bit frustrating at times, but it was a bit of a beast. But there was still a lot to do on it, and it turned out really well. And Ed had my wall bass just in the mix perfectly, and So there were elements that you had to play because the writer wanted to hear certain things, but there was still a bit to do,
Would you guys sort of suggest to each other, like, was that a frequent thing where you'd say, oh, I'd like you to play this part. I'd like you to, this is what I want you doing on this record. It's already sort of set.
Yeah. I mean, even with my stuff, I'd play the riff and one of the guys would have to play the riff, like the meeting place and the guitar parts on None Such. They were, Wake Up or something, there was I had that on my demo. So, you wanted them to play it, So there was a feeling that there's still a bit for the musician to do, but there were certain riffs that the writer would want you to play,
Right. We could have a whole conversation about the meeting place. That's actually one of my favorite songs, and I love the way the percussion kind of links up with everything else in that one.
Yeah, that kind of horse's trot at the beginning. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, Todd's Fairlight. He had a Fairlight with all these sounds in, So that was kind of good. And going back to Skylarking, there was the finger clicking at the start of The Man Who Sailed Around His Soul.
Right.
It was a competition between who had the best finger click. And it was me that had the best finger click. So that you're hearing my finger click.
Oh, nice.
I think it was entered into the Fairlight and processed to buggery, I suppose. Yeah.
So at some point there could be like a expanded edition of Skylarking with the bonus track where you hear David's finger click, and then you hear Andy's finger click and Todd's finger click, and you have 4 different tracks just to see if you could tell the difference.
Well, Todd was the adjudicator over the finger click. Yeah, I don't think he did one, but he was in the control room. Right, Colin, it's your turn. You get in there and do your click. Andy, okay, yeah.
And then Andy got mad that his finger click wasn't taken, and that was the rest of the day was shot.
I'm not saying anything.
So we're getting like into None Such, and then, it'll be the Apple Venus records. But how much was your songwriting changing in terms of kind of what you wanted to write about and maybe the way you were writing? Did you feel like you were sort of getting interested in different ways of expressing things or different things to express at that point?
A bit more of the minutiae of life, I suppose. Certainly in terms of tracks like Dying and Bungalow as well on
right.
On Such, they were kind of oddities. That's my speciality, oddities, really. But yeah, I consider my songwriting 90% failures, but I live for the 10% because you've got to take risks and chances,
90% failures, like you don't like 90% of your songs?
Well, the thing is, I'm seduced by melody. That's the thing. I'm seduced by melody. But just because you come up with a good melody, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good song, I think there's 10% where I would stick my hand up and say, yes, those songs are going to last, whereas some of the others won't, From that perspective, that kind of everlasting thing, they're going to be failures. But I don't mind. I'm used to failures. That's from the old days. Because, if you shoot from the hip, you're going to fail,
Yeah.
But you might come up with something fantastic,
Yeah.
So
failure, you're being pretty hard on yourself, though. I would not call those songs failures. What are the ones that you consider failures, and then what are the ones that you would stick your hand up and say, okay, this one will be good for the end till the end of time?
The ones that I'm most proud of is probably stuff like Frivolous Tonight, Bungalow, Dying, stuff that's slightly off the wall, I think. And I think my best song is probably the 2 songs that I wrote, or the songs that I wrote for TC and I after I left the band. I think that's probably my best stuff. I think Scatter Me is
Scatter Me. I was going to ask about that one.
My best song ever, I think. And Hardest Battle and stuff, But yeah, failures. Well, I don't know. Grass. I don't know whether it's much good. It's kind of melodic, but I don't know whether it's tip-top song. I like
perfect. It's perfect on that record. It's perfect on where Grass goes right into Summer's Cauldron, into Grass, into the Meeting Place is like one of the fantastic starts of any album. So I'm going to stand up for Grass, and I love the sound of it. And right. It's just a small song. It's like
Yeah. It's a little vignette, really. I'll go along with your description then.
You were about to say bad things about Big Day, also.
No, but I think Big Day is one of the ones I'm most proud of.
Okay.
Yeah, about marriage as an institution, and you've got to be careful. About your son comes to you and says, "Yeah, I'm going to get married, Dad." But you got to be careful, son. There's implications here. So yeah, that's what that's about. I think that's a good subject matter. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with that one.
I'm glad you pulled out Bungalow also. It's a great little sort of odd song toward the end of None Such. It's really good sound to it, and I don't know. That one.
I think artistically, I think it's one of my better ones. using those diminished chords in the way that they happen is, I think, is quite new. And about your parents' idea of a blissful end in their retirement. They retire to the sea in a bungalow and stuff. And certainly my parents had that ideal in their heads, didn't actually materialize, but yeah, I'm kind of proud of that, really. But it's the minutiae ones, which I think I'm most proud of,
Yeah, there's definitely this reflective quality in those later songs of yours.
You know that they're not going to be big songs, but you know that you should finish them and do them, and they will be enjoyed. But you know that they're not going to be big hit songs, just by virtue of the content, chiefly. The way they're arranged and stuff. You know they're not going to be big hit songs, but you still want to do them. See, I think one of the best songs that the Beach Boys ever did was a song called Little Bird.
Oh, I love that song.
Yeah.
The Dennis song.
Yeah, I think Dennis sang it. I'm not sure who composed it, whether it was Brian Wilson or whatever, but I think he's got his stamp on it. But I don't know. Perhaps the listeners will know.
It's like 2 minutes long.
I just love the changes in it and the way it goes from one thing to another in that. I think it's superb. Yeah. I think it's the best thing the Beach Boys ever did. Apart from God only knows, of course, some good vibrations and one or two others.
Right. In these, so like None Such, Apple Venus, Wasp Star, do you feel like you and Andy were sort of in sync artistically in terms of what you wanted these, XTC records to sound like and what you wanted them to do and how your songs fit together?
I think Andy wanted to record too much, and that's why it more or less put us on the verge of bankruptcy, really. In the end, we ended up finishing the records up at my place, That's why Dave left, because he was worried about the finances, I think, and Andy wanted to record everything. I suppose he thought, well, this is the last chance. This may well be the last XTC record, and I want to get everything out there that I possibly can, But, with that, when you're recording so much material, it costs money, to record. And that was what the problem was, is that Andy wanted to record too much material. In the end, we kind of did this thing whereby we divided the material up, but that wasn't until David left. So maybe he left for nothing. I don't know. I think his idea that we should choose an album from the songs and we should record that and, lock it in time. And that's what we're going to do. Back to Todd, I suppose, in that respect, But yeah, it was unfortunate the way it ended, We carried on for a bit, but, I think Andy felt that he was a spent force by that time and wanted to wrap it up. I just wish he had told me and we could have wrapped it up earlier, There were one or two. I think I'd wrote Say It for the album, which was going to be on the forthcoming XTC record that never was,
Right.
But it was kind of sad the way it ended with Dave, really, because he wanted to ring fence an album and for us to do it. And we could have done it, but at the time we were just recording everything, recording the backing track to everything, And of course, Hayden Bendel kind of resigned because he said, I can't really spend any more time. He was the producer. Can't really spend any more time on the record, fellas, because I've got to do another record with somebody else. So, then we ended up getting Nick Davis in. But by that time, we formulated a plan whereby we would record some of the more acoustic ones and some of the more orchestral ones and finish those off first. That would be Apple Venus Volume 1.
Right.
And the heavier ones we could do the following year. Personally, I felt the better songs were on the first one. And I remember having a conversation with Andy. I say, look, why don't we take 6 months off and write some more material and try and make the second one stronger? That was my feeling about it. But he was adamant, oh, no, we're okay, and it'll be fine, but that's my opinion on it. I think it was number one was stronger than number two. in
Yeah.
my
I think a lot of people feel that way, honestly.
yeah
I think Wasp Star is a little more uneven, and Apple Venus Volume 1 is wonderful. So None Such was 92. And
yeah
it wasn't
yeah.
there some legal thing with the record company? Because it was 7 years before Apple Venus, because Apple Venus Volume 1 was 99. And I remember like just constantly like, where's the next XCC record? And I would sort of hear, and I knew people in like, the music business here, and they're like, oh, I've heard demos and it's fantastic. And like years before it came out, and it just seemed like there was this really
Yeah.
protracted gestational period for those two records, as it turned out.
Well, Andy had said to the record company, "We're not making another record for you until you up the ante." I mean, essentially, we were on the same royalty rate that we were on in 1977, and it was a bum rate, and there was packaging deductions, and it all served to make your cut minuscule, So he said to Virgin, "No, we're not going to make another record with you unless we get a better deal." Consequently, we didn't work for years, So in the end, they agreed to let us go. That was the upshot of it. I think 97. I think we got permission that we could tear it up and go if we wanted to, and we were out into the independent world, which is a bit chilly, I'll tell you.
Right.
Virgin for an awful long time, and I consider that our years with Virgin were very good, although we did have a bum deal, and they could have upped the ante. But we signed some contracts with other companies, TBT in America and Pony Canyon, I think, in Japan. It was Cooking Vinyl in the UK. But I don't know. I don't know whether they really got behind the record, to be honest. So I don't know. It was a kind of a bit of a topsy-turvy time for us, really. Yeah.
How big of a blow is it to lose Dave during those sessions?
It was a hell of a blow. Yeah. There was talk that he was going to go on the road with Blondie or something. And I think he turned it down because he was going to carry on with us, but maybe he should have took it. I don't know. But it was terrible. There was when we were working at Chipping Norton, there was a big outburst from Andy, that people weren't pulling their weight and stuff, I don't know whether that was directed at Dave. I don't know. But a few weeks later, Dave just chucked in the towel. But I think we were scheduled to do some orchestral work at Abbey Road, which was going to cost about 15,000 quid for one day. It was a colossal amount of money. And we were going to do the Green Man, all the strings on the Green Man, and all the orchestral ones, I Can't Own Her and stuff, and the brass on Frivolous Tonight. It was going to be a complete day of orchestral instruments, and it was costing an arm and a leg, which we really didn't have. We were running out of money. And because we didn't have a plan of what we were going to record, it was so open-ended that I think Dave, it was the last straw for Dave, and so he said that was it, walked out, that was it. So, yeah.
I was going to say, Andy's released so many of his demos, and it seems like a lot of those songs he was arranging to such an extent that I'm wondering if there was also a sense that there was sort of less room for everyone else in what he was doing.
Yes, I think there was. I think when somebody comes to you and say, "This is how it's going to be. This is how I want it. Can you do it?" I think, well, why don't you do it then? What's there to me to think about? I'm just playing your parts. So there was certainly a bit of that. I think, yeah. I think Andy had got so exacting about what he wanted. There was no room for maneuver, and when that happens, what is there for the musician to do, So yeah, I think there was a bit of that as well.
But did you still think, oh, well, Andy and I will carry on as XTC. We'll be like Steely Dan, the two of us, the songwriters, and then, we'll fill it out, but we'll continue for, more albums after, Wasp Star?
It felt strange, to be honest. the three that had been together for so many years. It felt really strange. I almost felt as though I was Andy's adversary, to be honest. And I didn't know. To me, I think he had it in his mind that this would be the last. But I just wish he'd have told me, and I could have, drew a line under it and perhaps formulated ideas in my head. But I come up with one or two songs for the album that never was. So one of them was "Say It," definitely, and he liked that. But he had one or two ideas as well. But I don't know. I just got the impression he was holding back.
So there wasn't like a breakup announcement or anything. It was more just at some point he said, "Oh yeah, we're done," or how did that happen?
Well, we kind of just drifted, and there was a argument about the studio because the studio remained empty for years. Basically, if I could tell the story, when we were doing Oranges and Lemons and David left, we put our own money in to buy some equipment, and we finished the first Oranges and Lemons project with Nick Davis up in my living room. Can you believe it?
Apple Venus,
sorry. Yeah, I beg your pardon. Apple Venus, Volume 1, we finished at my house, in the house. We just took over the whole house, the passageways and the two rooms at the front. I had a big Victorian house, and that's where we finished it. And, Nick Davis had been engaged to mix it down at Rockfield. But that was essentially, and then the two of them had ideas to actually do the second project in my garage, which basically I just had my car and a few gardening tools in there at the time. And so they said, well, why don't we convert it, And then there was this thing, we converted it into a studio of sorts, and that's where we recorded the second Apple Venus project. But where we fell out was basically 5 years went by and nothing happened. And by that time, my kids had left home and I wanted to move house. And we fell out over what the actual company had put into the garage, which became the studio.
Right.
What pay back, and I thought, blimey, I've saved the band all this money. And we couldn't decide about what I was going to pay. So I didn't realize that I was going to have to pay anything. But it was pointed out by our accountants that my garage had been deemed a company asset. So I thought, oh my God, my good intentions have got me in the shite here. So in the end, to cut a long story short, the Inland Revenue, or the HMRC, is the tax people in the UK. They had to intervene and they told me what I had to pay. So I had to pay a shite load of money back to the company, which was going to be dissolved anyway when the band split up. So that was the way it was. So it didn't finish very amicably,
So really became like a financial dispute in the end, and not an artistic one.
Yes, not an artistic one. No, I think I'd long given up on the artistic one, but it wasn't going to happen, But it was just how the loose ends were going to be tied up financially, but by volunteering my garage as being the venue for the studio to do the final album, Wasp Star, I'd inadvertently kind of got myself in a bit of financial mess, basically. So yeah, I wasn't too pleased about that, but and so it ended, and we had a couple of years where we didn't speak, and it got back on course. I think we were all be prepared to bury the hatchet and get on with it, really, because the years have been so good. What can you do? You can't.
Right.
With the volume of work that we'd worked on together, it'd just be foolish to kind of let that incident mar everything else,
Right. So all four of you are in Swindon now, right?
Yeah, pretty much round and about. Yes. Andy has this place in Brighton as well. but he's kept his house in Swindon as well, and I think he flits between the two, you know. Dave's still, where he was, and I'm pretty much still where I am, just outside Swindon in one of the villages, you know. I'm going up towards the White Horse, so I'm not
There you
too
go.
far.
Yeah, and Terry moved back from Australia, and you guys did the TCNI EP and played a show together, some shows together. And how was that? First of all, just like deciding to do a new project with Terry, who you hadn't played with since 1982, 3.
I know. It was the weirdest time because he came back to attend a wedding, and he never went back. Basically, he got divorced and hitched up with his old girlfriend from 40 years previous, and he got divorced, and basically he was living in the UK, and it happened virtually sort of overnight. And I'd heard that he was. Well, first of all, we went out for a drinking session, as you do with Terry, and we ended up at the White Horse pub, which is at the foot of the White Horse at Uffington, and we were drinking and eating pizzas and stuff one late Sunday night, and and he told me that he was staying here, and he'd hitched up with Lynn, his old girlfriend, and they were going to make a go of it again, and so he was in the UK to stay. So by that time, I was just started this EP, these tracks that I was going to put out. And I thought, I wonder whether he would be interested, And I said, I'm doing this EP. Do you fancy coming in with me on the EP? And he said, well, we could do, but I don't think he'd touched a drum kit in about God knows how many years. But, anyway, I persuaded him, and so we formed TCNI and did the EP, and it turned out really well. It was very unusual. And of course, Terry's thing is playing live, and he wanted to play some live shows. And I was kind of intrigued because I had the XTC material, the catalogue, my songs, and I was intrigued to think how Grass and the Meeting Place would be if I played them live,
And with Terry drumming on him, who hadn't drummed on the originals.
He didn't play on the originals, no. So there was that to consider. Plus there was the originals. There was stuff like Nigel and stuff we could play.
Right, of course.
I thought we could do some shows, but I really didn't want to get a promoter involved. When you get promoters involved, you're in for the duration, really. So I thought, well, I wouldn't mind dipping my toe in it, but I don't want to do it on a big scale. So we booked some local places. We booked the Art Centre in Swindon, and that's where we had a set piece that we were going to play every night, like a residency, And that's what we did for 6 nights in Swindon. But the rub came really because Terry wanted to expand the live operation, basically carry on from where we were from 1982 with XTC, I said, no, I'm really not into that, Terry, And I didn't want any resentment being set up. So I said, well, perhaps we ought to call it a day then, and leave it there, and that's what we did, But yeah, we're fine with each other. It was just a different, we had different agendas,
Right. Yeah. You still wanted to stay closer to home than go out on the road and tour the US. I mean, he's come with the EXTC, he's come to Chicago at least 3 times. So, cause I've seen him here, and I know he's been back even since the last time I saw him. And that wasn't something that you wanted to be like traveling around the US over and over on that stuff, hitting city wineries and clubs and all of that.
I really didn't want to tour in the conventional sense of world tours and stuff, The set piece in Swindon, that may seem like small potatoes to people, but, it was a small club and a small little theatre, and I thought that would be nice as a showpiece for what we were doing and for some of the compositions that I'd written for XTC. And that was where I wanted to keep it, But he wanted to, we've got the promoters in Japan interested. And I thought, no, I'm really not interested in taking it any further, I'd become conditioned, I'd had all those years playing in the studio, and I'd become conditioned to working, and I quite liked it, So I said, well, it's really not me, Tao, sorry. So I want to knock it on the head. So I think he was a bit peeved to begin with. But, now he's got his own operation going. I'm sure he's enjoying it a lot more, So fair play to him,
Well, one advantage you had is that because this had grown out of him playing your songs when he was coming over here with the XTC, it was about half your songs and half Andy's songs, and he was playing. I mean, they played "Scatter Me" and they were standing in for Joe. So your songs were represented well in that, at least.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what you want to do. Why not? It's there for the taking, But it really wasn't where I wanted to be,
Yeah,
So,
it is a sign of your modesty that you called that project TC and I. I mean, you could have gone out as Colin Moulding, which you did, later when you recorded a song on your own. But TC and I was still you kind of like it's a modest thing to do, I would say.
I thought it was about right. There was a film in England called With Nail and I.
Right, great movie.
Great movie. And I kind of got the idea from that, really, I suppose. I thought it was kind of a short. It uses the TC from XTC as well,
Right.
But that was an afterthought, really. TC, it was Terry Chambers,
Right.
That's where the name came from. But I thought it was succinct enough, and it was catchy. So, and still tipped its hat to XTC as well. So I thought that was about right,
Is there a Colin Moulding album that's going to happen eventually? Like you and Andy have both put out all these EPs, and I'm wondering if at some point there's going to be like an album.
Well, I can't speak for Andy, of course, but from my point of view, albums take time, And at 68, you don't really have the time, So if you get something, you put it out, It's an age thing, I think. If you got something, just put it out. If I haven't got anything, then you won't hear from me. That's the way I work. I'd like to do another EP, but the songs have to be top whack. I wouldn't really like to slip in kind of quality. I think when you've got the XTC catalog, that's something to live up to. So you have to be as good as you can be. Plus, I like doing sessions. I've still not resigned the fact that I'm a musician as well. I started when I was 15 and I wanted to be a professional musician, and I thought, there's that side of me likes to be a jobbing musician as well, So I play bass on people's records and sing and tinker. So that there's that side of it as well, So that's all good.
Right. Well, I talked to Sam Phillips a while back, and you're on Martinis and Bikinis, which is a great album, and Baby I Can't Please You, which has, I think that you co-produced that song too. It has this kind of almost
well,
Bollywood sort of thing on there.
Yeah, I suggested on that track. I said, "Oh God, it sounds like an Indian pop song." I mean, that's all I said. I said, "You ought to do it as an Indian pop song," and that's all I said. And he ends up giving me a credit, But it's him essentially, kind of being the producer, really.
T-Bone, you mean?
T-Bone, yeah. I love working with him because he's a really odd ideas man, Of course, I got that session through River Phoenix.
Huh.
River Phoenix lived next door to T-Bone and Sam Phillips. They were a married couple at the time. And I think they lived next door to River Phoenix in West Hollywood. And a few years before, River Phoenix had turned up at the studio while we were working on Oranges and Lemons. I thought he was a tramp, This guy with his rucksack. And I asked the engineer, I said, "Oh, who's that?" He said, "Well, that's River Phoenix. He's a movie star." "Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I hadn't heard of him. And so he was a big XTC fan, and I think he put my name forward as being to play bass on Sam's record, We did it at Jackson Brown's studio in Santa Monica. So I had a week in the sun. Back then you could do that, They didn't request that you did it over the internet. They wanted you there in person.
Right.
Yeah, it was a good little session to do. But I came in on the Saturday, and everybody had these glum faces, And I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, have you heard? I said, heard what? He said, River Phoenix, he died last night at the Viper Rooms.
Oh, wow.
So, Christ, he got me the gig, you know. So that was the story there, you know. So I thought, so I got in my car and drove to the airport, and I thought, just said ta-da to people, but they were in another world because they just heard this rotten news, you know. So, yeah, very unfortunate.
Do you have like a sort of a collection of songs you've been recording over the years that you're like, yeah, I don't want to release this one, but, you know, it's stuff that you're working on?
I'm sure all the decent ones are out there, you know. I'm sure all the best ones are out there. And no, it's the old XTC board that me and Andy bought together. There's only about, I don't know, there's about 5 or 6 of the channels that are broke. I just use it because I only need 8, you know, with the recording facility that I have. So, you know, I don't record any more than 8 at once anyway. So, yeah. But no, you know, I'm sure if there had been a masterpiece lying idle somewhere, I'm sure you'd have heard about it.
Do you have like a routine for like a time of the day where maybe you'll sit with a guitar and try to write, or do you practice bass at some point, or, you know, do you have any routines around music, or is it more just kind of like when you feel like it, you'll play around with stuff?
No, in the mornings when I'm still in bed, that was how I wrote the TC and I EP. Was in bed, basically with the laptop, with the keyboard plugged into the laptop, basically, and I just tinker with the headphones on, you know, for chord changes and melodies and stuff. You know, that's become a format of mine to actually tinker in the mornings, and in the evenings is recording time, really. I just played on the Scott Mickelson thing. He's an American, I think, or is he Canadian? Not quite sure. I think he's American. So I played bass on his record, and I just finished that around Christmas time. And so I've been, I come in here principally to record. There's too much pressure when you come into the studio to think, yeah, you got to come up with something, you know? Whereas I think the best ideas are just when you're watching the TV or something, or, you know, following a muse that you gleaned from something. So I think that the best stuff comes up in sort of idle times, you know, when you've not put pressure on yourself to come up with something. I think if I come into the studio, then I have to record, you know. And I have this little setup out in the garden, so that's when I record. But generally, for ideas, it's mornings in bed with the laptop and the little toy keyboard I've got, you know.
In terms of you guys all being in Swindon now, like who's in touch with whom? Are you guys all on speaking terms, or is it pretty much everyone sort of sticks to himself?
We were never, even when we were going at full flight together, I don't think we were kind of social chums, you know. We had families, and so we kept ourselves pretty much to ourselves. And I think that remained, you know, and it remains to today, except we don't work with one another now. But it still remains that kind of, you know, once in a while contact. And, you know, obviously I've got everybody's email, and we converse, you know, if there's something to converse about, usually about business, you know, money and stuff. Yeah, the checks in the post, all this kind of thing, you know.
Right.
But yeah.
Have the 4 of you like been in a room together at any point?
Well, obviously, what with my dealings with Terry, it's a lot more cordial, and because, you know, it wasn't so long ago that we worked together, you know.
Right.
No, I haven't seen Andy probably since I left, to come to think of it. I don't think I've even seen him in the street. Mind you, he has this place in Brighton, so he's not in Swindon all of the time. Not that I go into Swindon that much, really. So, yeah, I don't think I've seen them, really.
Is the last time the 4 of you were together when Terry walked out on the Love and a Farm Boy's Wages session?
No. Terry actually did come over from Australia when we were doing Nonsuch, and there is a photograph of us together, which I think had just recently been in the local paper. So there is a photograph from 1991 of us together at Chipping Norton doing Nonsuch, and Terry looked in. I remember I picked him up and we drove. He was at his mum and dad's. I picked him up and took him up to Chipping Norton, which is only about 30 miles away from Swindon. So and we reacquainted ourselves then, But so there has been contact.
Could you envision the four of you ever, either sitting around a table in a pub together, or, just trying to just do one more song together, or anything musically, whether it's like a one-off performance or just, trying to put together anything again? Or is that just done?
There's no mention of it from the others. I mean, the internet affords you to work together remotely anyway, doesn't it?
Right. But you're all in the same town. Like that's the thing that sort of blows my mind, is that you're all back there, but you're in your little bungalows or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we're not so far away, are we? But, we're English, we're buttoned up. I don't foresee it, no. That's not to say it won't happen, but I don't foresee it. Yeah.
Would you want it to happen, or is it just too much time has passed?
Don't know. Just the way we are, I think. All those old feelings. Oh yes, that's what I didn't like about you, wasn't it? All these kind of feelings come back. You think, oh no, not the old order again. No way, no.
I bet you guys have enough songs by now, and probably could come up with more. Maybe,
but I don't know. I don't know whether the inclination and the push to do it is there. Don't know. I don't know. You'd have to ask some of the others whether they would be interested, but I don't know. My guess is that it won't happen, and I'm not sure whether I have the inclination myself.
Right. Are the sort of the more hard feelings gone, at least? Like, are you guys not mad at each other anymore?
Yeah, I think that's subsided, and all that nonsense over the money, I think that's dissipated. And, Andy and I talk quite a bit, probably more so than the others, and mainly about kind of stuff that, oh yeah, remember that off the TV? Yes, I remember that, all this kind of old stuff. And old feelings, old jokes, they're still there, and I'll be unlikely to go away.
Do you have a sense also of just like kind of how much your work is appreciated at this point? Because certainly, between the reissues and just the fact that, these songs exist and people still listen to them. I mean, you're a band that's held up. And I wonder how much of a sense of that you have.
I think we've become more appreciated in the last 10 years than whatever we thought, And I do think of the others in my quiet moments, more than they think.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a treat for me. I really appreciate it.
And you, Mark. Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
That's it for episode 119 of Caropop. Thanks again to Colin Moulding for being such a gracious, illuminating guest, and of course, for all the great music. He makes any day a big day. Go to burningshed.com to order Moulding's CD single, The Hardest Battle, and a signed copy of the TC&I EP, Great Aspirations, which Moulding recorded with Terry Chambers. Burning Shed carries the latest XTC re-releases as well. Caropop is produced by Chris Swake, who should be king for a day, because he's one of the millions. We encourage you to support Caropop so we can keep this podcast free and sustainable. Please give whatever you'd like on caropop.com. We appreciate you all. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow Caropop on Twitter, X, and Instagram at Caropopcast. You can follow me as well at Mark Caro, at MarkCaro. Please share this episode, subscribe, tell your friends, and tune in again next week for another Caropop conversation. Thanks.